We are ready to go. Okay, here we go. Perek Yud Ches. We begin a totally new section of Tanya. Up until this point, we've been discussing the longer way, right? As we say, right in the title page, the longer, shorter way, Bechlal, is the idea of Chabad Hasidus, because the objective is, as the objective of all Hasidus is to affect the heart, to affect the emotions, that a person should be very excited about Yiddishkeit, should be excited about doing all different mitzvahs, learning Torah, etc. The question is, how do we get there? How do we make it happen? Right? That's what the question is. So the Chabad approach is through the Mayach. Mayach shalat al halev, right, as we've been discussing for months now. Okay? Having said that, there are two different ways in the Chabad system. They're both Chabad ways, so to speak, but in the Chabad system, there are two different ways. There is the longer way, which we've been discussing up until chapter 17. We just finished chapter 17. We culminated with the explanation of every single person has an ava enough, an ava la saiso. Like we said, right? Kikar v'lacha davar ma'oid beficha levavcha la'asaiso. Why did it put levavcha next to la'asaiso? Because of the idea that there's enough of an emotion in my brain that says, this is good for me, that I am ready to do this. This makes sense. I am going to go against my animal soul, and I'm going to do what I need to do. That much we have. But Bichlal, in general, the longer way is a much more holistic way. It's slowly but surely changing oneself. Little by little. It's an avodah of 120 years until we're no longer in this world, right? We're constantly working on refining and purifying, changing ourselves. Chapter 18 starts a whole new story. Chapter 18 starts what is known as the shorter way. Why is it called the shorter way? Because I have an issue right now. How am I going to deal with this? I have a temptation, I have a desire, I have something that it's driving me in a certain way. How am I going to stop myself? That's the question at hand. How am I going to control myself? So if we're just dependent on the longer way, that's a lifetime event. It's a journey, right? That starts, of course, with one step, but it's a journey. We need something right now. So for that, we need, right, what we'll call tapping into the nuclear power plant that we have inside of ourselves. What is known as the Ava Misiteres. Now, we've mentioned the Ava Misiteres several times in the past 6 chapters, but here we're going to get into it in a much more greater way. Because the idea here is not really about holistically changing. It's more like the example I would give is if a person has a headache. So he needs to get something done, so he decides he's going to take a couple of Tylenol. The Tylenol are not going to heal him. The Tylenol are not going to heal him. He has an underlying issue that has to be taken care of. But right now, he just wants to alleviate the pain for the moment in order that he should be able to accomplish whatever it is that he wants to accomplish. So he takes Tylenol, right? The same thing here. What we're doing with the shorter way between chapters 18 and chapter 25 is a very similar idea. Right now, I'm about to do an avera. I'm about to do a sin. I'm about to do something wrong. I don't want to do that. But do I have the control within myself? Do I have the power within myself to stop myself? The answer is, of course, yes, I do. The question is how? How do I do it? So that's what we're going to be discussing now. Okay, so let's start. Page 46, Perek Yud Ches, here we go. V'letoisef is biur. An additional explanation, be'er heitev, we're going to explain very well. Milas ma'oid, right? Again, we're focusing again and again on our main thesis statement of the Tanya, which is the pasuk that we find all the way at the end of the book of Devarim. Shebepasuk kikarav elecha davar ma'oid. This thing is very close to you. Beficha levavcha la'asaiso. Right in your ficha, in your mouth, levavcha, either in your thought or, as we learned now in chapter 17, in your heart and emotion, la'asaiso, to do. So once again, we have a problem, and we keep on coming back to this problem because the Torah is a Torah of emes, and the Torah is being spoken to not just the generation of Moses that was in the desert, but it's talking to our generation in 2023. right? And when it says this thing is very close to me, it means it's very close to me. So the question is, how in the world does it say it's very close to me? I think the opposite is true. I have a desire, I want to do something wrong, it's not very close to me. I'm finding it very, very hard to control myself. And we all have these problems, right? We all have these emotional days that things are not going the right way or whatever it happens to be. It says, however, in Torah that it's very close to me. So my reading on the situation and what the Torah is saying seems to be not jiving. Doesn't seem to be working out. So clearly I know that I'm missing something here because I know that the Torah is right. The Torah is emes. Torah is a Torah of emes for all the generations and including me, right? All the way, thousands of years later. So the question is, how do I understand this word ma'od? So he says, tzarich leida. We have to know ne'emana ki af mi shedaso kitzara b'yedias Hashem. So even a person who is das is very small in knowing Hashem. So he says very interesting words here, right? What is he saying? Up until now, we've been talking about the idea of how the emotion that we need, which is the power inside of me, to be able to overcome any negative forces inside of me, any negative desires, any negative emotions, right? Right, is an emotion that I grow out of my brain. My brain, as we talked about many times in the past few classes, is being used to meditate on the greatness of Hashem. And by understanding Hashem, and understanding it to the best of our ability, of course, understanding my soul, understanding what we're doing in this world, by understanding these things, it should arouse within me an emotion, an excitement, a desire to do the right things and to, be the person that I could potentially be. Right? So in that way, we see very clearly how the emotion is really rooted in the brain. It starts with the brain and it goes to the emotion. But let's say, he says here, what about a person that doesn't have that? In other words, he doesn't really have the information. And not only doesn't he have the information, probably even more importantly than having the information, is he doesn't have the das. The das means, we learned all the way back, if you remember, going all the way back to the beginning of Tanya, when we were discussing the different spheres, the different kaichas of the soul, we explained das at the end of chapter 3, right? We described it's the idea of connection to something. It's the idea of a focus and a connection of one thing to another. Really, in modern day English, you would say it almost like in a way of internalization. That's really das. Das is internalization. I'm thinking about something and I have this information, and then das enables me to focus in on it to the point that it becomes internalized within me. In other words, let's say a person that smokes, right? So he smokes cigarettes, and he looks at every single box of cigarettes, and it says on the box of cigarettes, "This will kill you." But nevertheless, he lights up and he continues smoking, and it just keeps on going. Then, he hears all the reports and everything like that. Smoking is bad for you. Smoking does damage to you. Don't smoke. On and on and on. No one at this point in time in life is saying smoking is really a good thing. It's healthy. It's not a question. But yet he continues and continues and continues and continues. God forbid he goes to the doctor and he can't stop coughing. And all of a sudden they take an x-ray on his lung and they see all these different whatever. Let's not even talk about it, right? And the doctor says, this is what's going on. All of a sudden, the guy is like shocked and he changes, it hits home, right? That is called internalization. That is called das. It becomes real. It becomes a part of him. Up until now, it's not that he didn't have the information. He had the information. As a matter of fact, he saw it every single time he bought a box of cigarettes. He saw it very clearly. No one's lying to him. It's just, it's not talking about me. Or maybe not even that he thinks about it, whether it's talking about him or not. It's just he doesn't think. He doesn't internalize it. So the quality of das is a very, very special and important quality amongst human beings. And we have to, value it, and we have to develop it more and more and more. Because that is taking the information of whatever information really we're dealing with and internalizing it in order to be able to impact me. Now, having said that, this particular person is very weak in this area, right? And not just that. It says like this, and then he doesn't even have a heart, doesn't have the emotions, he's not built in such a way that he is able to really feel the emotions behind it. To really give birth to a dechilu. Dechilu is an Aramaic word that means fear. And berechimu is the Aramaic word which means love. Right? So he doesn't have this quality. And then he goes even a step further, which we didn't go in chapter 17. He says, Afilu b'moicha b'tvunoso levad. Even in his brain and in his tfuna alone, which is an interesting question because we said in chapter 17, if you remember, we were talking about how whoever has a mayach bekad kado, remember that whole phrase? Whoever has a brain in his skull, he should be able to do this, right? So here he's talking about a person. He doesn't have it. He can't think. He can't sit down. He can't internalize. He can't focus. He's told, why don't you meditate on this? Okay, he meditates. As soon as he sits down to meditate, his brain is thinking this, he's thinking that. He's all over the place. He's not there, right? So maybe we could say that the Tanya is not for him. The Torah is not for him. So obviously that is not true. You can't say that. And not only can't we say that, it says in the pasuk, Kikarav elecha davar ma'od. This thing is very close to me, every single one of us. Even the person that doesn't have these talents and doesn't have these instruments in himself, that he's not able to do it. So we have a major contradiction going on here. Because I see with my own two eyes that it doesn't seem to be that it's applicable to me. And I see in the Torah that it says very clearly it's applicable to me. So we have to figure out, how does this work? Nevertheless, the Alter Rebbe says here, this thing is very close to him. Lishmor bilasos. Lishmor, to guard, namely the negative commandments. Bilasos, the positive commandments. Kol mitzvahs ha-Torah, the whole Torah, betalmud Torah keneged kulam, like we always say in these chapters. And learning Torah is equal to everything. So he has within himself, it's right there. He has the strength to be able to do this. He can do this. It's very close to him. So how does this job? So he says, Talmud Torah keneged kulam, befiv, in his mouth, ubelevavo mamish. Now look at those words, levavo mamish. Now, levavo mamish means that it's a real emotion. You could look at it as befiv could be in his speaking, levavo could be his thinking, but then he says levavo mamish, right? Then he says ma'umka deliba be'emes le'emiso, in a true emotion. Now we know, we've been studying this now for a long time, we know developing a true emotion for anything is very, very hard. So here now we seem to be going the opposite direction. He says anyone could do this, and it's not a problem, right? And he says, b'dechilu v'rechimu, not just one way, with fear and with love. How so? Shehi ha'ava misuteres shebelev klalos Yisrael. This is the hidden love that every Jew has, Shehi Yerusha Lanu Me'avoseinu, which is an inheritance from our forefathers. This energy, this nuclear power that we have inside of ourselves is hidden. Meaning what? What does it mean to have an emotion that's hidden? By definition, it seems like two opposite things. An emotion is by definition revealed. That's why you call this person very emotional. This person is really very emotional. It's just all hidden. You don't say that, right? If you're saying the person's emotional, it means that you can see it all written all over his face and his body language and everything. That this is an emotional. But this is something different. This is that he has within him, built into his soul, an emotion that's there. That, as we're going to see as we go through these two chapters, 18 and 19 in particular, is always there. It's just a matter of how do I uncover it? How do I tap into it? It's not something that we've been talking about up until now. Up until now, we've been talking about creating something, creating emotion, meditating with my mind, and from my mind giving birth to an emotion in my heart, which is, so to speak, growing an emotion, creating an emotion. Here, that's not what we're talking about. Here, what we're going to be talking about is something that already exists. The question is, how do I get there? How do I get to it? How do I uncover it? So he says, Rak shetzarich lehaktim. So before we can really describe it completely, we have to preface it with the following 4 questions. Levar tchila, to explain first, Be'er Heita very well. Shayrish avazu. The first question is, and we're not going to go in order here, but I'm going in order when we read this, but it doesn't the chapters 18 and 19 answer all 4 questions, they just don't answer it in order. The first question is, what is the shayrish for this? Now, what is the root of it? Now, generally speaking, what we've been saying up until now is that the root of the emotion is the seichel, is the intellect, right? That's what we've been saying. Even in this class, we've been talking about that. That the intellect, through thinking about an idea, by really focusing in my mind about that idea, the objective is to give birth to this emotion. Here, we're saying that's not the case. The shayrish is not going to be from my intellect necessarily, because we're saying this is a type of scenario where it doesn't rely on my intellectual prowess, and it doesn't rely on my focusing of my das. It doesn't rely on those things. So therefore, you can't say that that's going to be the shayrish. That's question number 1. Ve'inyana. Question number 2 is, what's the inyan? Now, what does it mean by what's the inyan? Generally speaking, whenever you have an emotion, you have a goal for that emotion, right? You are emotionally driven because you have a focus of a target of what you want to feel, right? You want to, generally speaking, a person likes music. Why does he have an emotion? He likes to feel uplifted, for example. So he has a pull to music. He has a pull to wisdom or intellect because he is emotionally driven. He wants to be smarter. He has a, right? Or for even Avas Hashem, loving Hashem, right? Why does he want loving Hashem? Because he has an emotional tie to wanting to become more spiritual, more of a pleasure from spirituality, from godliness. These are all the idea of the inyan of this type of love. Like, what is the direction of the love is taking him in? Here, we can't say that that's going to be the direction. We're going to see in the beginning of chapter 19 what exactly is the inyan? What exactly is this love pushing towards? Like, where is it going? Then he says, "Ve'ech hi Yerusha lanu." Next question is that it's a Yerusha. A Yerusha, by definition, a Yerusha means an inheritance. It means that it doesn't matter who the person is. Meaning what? When you talk about certain pieces of information or intellect or whatever, you're talking about that it requires, should we say, certain skills that a person has, a certain intellectual capacity, a certain talent that this person has. A Yerusha has nothing to do with that. A Yerusha, an inheritance, means that the child is getting this inheritance regardless of who the child is. There's only one and only idea behind a Yerusha. The idea behind an inheritance is that he has so-and-so as a father. It has nothing to do with him. His father was ABC, and therefore he gets the Yerusha. He could be whatever. He could be the smartest person, the stupidest person. He could be the most wonderful person, the worst person. It's irrelevant. The whole concept of a Yerusha is based on who is the Yerusha coming from? Who is bequeathing this inheritance unto you, right? Has nothing to do with you. So we have to understand, how is this a Yerusha for us? And finally, we know that it discusses in Zayar that the emotions are like 2 wings on the part of a bird. And you need 2 wings for a bird to fly. Those 2 main emotions are Ava, love, and Yira, fear, right? Excitement for Yiddishkeit, taking Yiddishkeit seriously. Here we're talking about Ava Misuteres. Ava Misuteres seems to be talking about just a hidden love. But we know that you can't have a bird fly with only one wing. So therefore, we have to say that there has to be a fear, there has to be a yira that's involved here as well. So we have to see, how does the yira fit in? And that's the last few words here. How is the fear also included in this whole story? And we'll get to that at the end of chapter 19, God willing. Okay? All right, let's stop here, and we'll begin the answers, God willing, in tomorrow's class. That's it.